Alright, so this happened back in the summer of 2010 when I was around 12 or 13 years old. My family and a bunch of family friends took a trip to this really nice hotel in the city. To this day, I don't actually know why we went, but it was a fun trip. Lots of card games, ghost stories, and general goofing around. The hotel had a weird design where the lobby wasn't on the first floor, but the fourth, and you could only get there by elevator, not stairs. That little detail didn't seem important at first, but later, well, let's just say I wish I had known about it beforehand. So, on the third morning of our stay, I woke up to loud screaming coming from the lobby below. Since the hotel was built in this square shape, with balconies on every floor overlooking the lobby, sound traveled weirdly. I stepped outside and looked over the railing to see a girl collapsed on the floor with groceries spilled everywhere, and a crowd gathering around her. Naturally, I wanted to find out what was going on, so I decided to head down to meet my family, who were already in the lobby. My room was on the 7th or 8th floor, so I figured I'd just take the stairs down a few flights to the 4th floor where the lobby was. Easy, right? Except, as I walked down, I quickly realized I wasn't seeing any doors for floors 4, 3, or 2. I should have turned back right then, but I was already halfway down, and going back up sounded exhausting. Eventually, I reached the bottom, which was this cold, dimly lit basement with cinder block walls and concrete floors. In front of me were a pair of double doors. At the time, I just assumed it was another way to the lobby, so I went through. Big mistake. On the other side was this massive warehouse-like storage area, filled with stacks of chairs, tables, and boxes. It was dusty, musty, and completely empty. Definitely not the lobby. There was an elevator in the back, but when I tried to use it, I saw it needed a key card. No luck there. I turned back toward the stairwell door, but when I pulled the handle, my stomach dropped. It was locked. Now let me remind you, this was 2010, and I didn't have a phone yet because my parents had a rule about waiting until middle school graduation. So I had no way of calling for help. I started panicking, running around the storage area looking for another way out, but every door I found was locked. My mind spiraled into full-blown terror mode, convinced no one even knew I was missing. Then, the second door I had found, the one leading to who knows where, suddenly creaked open. A man stepped through. He was slim, middle-aged, wearing a lab coat of all things. If I had been older, I would have immediately questioned why the hell a guy in a lab coat was wandering around a hotel basement. But at 12 or 13, all I saw was an adult who looked smart, so I felt instant relief. He looked just as surprised to see me. "What are you doing down here?" he asked. Through my panicked tears, I told him I had gotten lost and locked in, then asked if he had a key. He didn't answer that part, but instead he said, "I know a way out. Follow me." I didn't even hesitate. I just followed him. We walked toward the stairwell doors, and I reached for the handle, thinking he'd unlock it, but he kept walking. That's when my gut started screaming at me that something was wrong. "Isn't the exit right here?" I asked. His expression shifted. Even in the dim light, I could see the sweat on his forehead. He looked nervous. "No, this way," he said, voice suddenly sharp. That was the moment everything clicked. He had no idea where he was going. He was leading me deeper into the basement. I froze. My heart was pounding. I knew there were no doors that way, just a dead end with stacks of boxes. I asked again, more forcefully, "Where are we going?" "Just follow me," he repeated, but I could hear the irritation in his voice now. That's when I did the only thing I could think of. I screamed. I screamed as loud as I possibly could, over and over, until my throat hurt and my head pounded. The man flinched and clapped his hands over his ears. "What are you doing?" he yelled. "Be quiet!" But I didn't stop. I kept screaming until suddenly, thank God, a door burst open. A janitor ran in. He took one look at the scene, me, a terrified kid, and this strange man in a lab coat standing in a locked basement, and immediately told me to get behind him. The man tried to play it off, mumbling something about looking for a bathroom. But the janitor wasn't buying it. He radioed the front desk, and I distinctly remember hearing him say, "This man came from outside. Get security." I was taken back up to the lobby, where I found my family, who, to my shock, had no idea I had even been missing. Through tears, I told them everything. They hugged me tight and thanked the staff profusely, but honestly, I was too shaken to process much. To this day, I have no idea who that man was, why he was in that basement, or what he was planning to do. The only thing I can piece together is that the second door must have led to the street, meaning he wasn't an employee. He had just wandered in from outside. Maybe it was all some bizarre misunderstanding, or maybe it wasn't. All I know is that if I hadn't screamed my lungs out, I might not have been here to tell this story. Let me tell you about one of the creepiest things that ever happened to me. This was about 10 years ago when I was living alone with my toddler in a two-family house. My brother's friend lived downstairs and had introduced me to the landlord, so that's how I ended up there. The setup was kind of weird. We had separate front doors, but we shared a back entrance with a staircase that ran from the basement all the way up to my apartment on the second floor. Since I had a bad habit of locking myself out, I often left my back door unlocked so my downstairs neighbor could let me in if needed. At the time, my neighbor had a friend who was going through a rough patch. He had a history of drug abuse but was supposedly clean, and my neighbor was letting him crash on his couch. At first, he seemed like a decent guy, but after a while, his presence became a problem, especially since my neighbor had a young daughter. Eventually, he was told to leave, and instead of, actually going somewhere else, he tried to sleep on our shared porch. We had to make it clear that when we said leave, we meant off the property entirely. Around the same time, he started making weird, uncomfortable comments toward me, so I was beyond relieved when he finally disappeared. For a while, we didn't see him around town, and I assumed he had moved on. Fast forward a month or two, and I started noticing small things going missing. Little bits of cash, jewelry, random lighters. Nothing major, so I brushed it off, thinking I had just misplaced them. The house was old, with super thin walls, and the back door, the one I used to leave unlocked, was right next to the bathroom. It had this very distinct creaking sound when it opened, so you always knew when someone came in. One day, my car was at the mechanic, so from the outside, it probably looked like I wasn't home. I was in the shower when I thought I heard that back door creak open. My whole body froze. I stood there, barely breathing, heart pounding, waiting for some horror movie scenario to unfold. But after a few minutes of nothing happening, I convinced myself I was being paranoid. I've always been the kind of person who hears a random noise and immediately thinks it's an axe murderer, so I chalked it up to my overactive imagination. Then, one day, the landlord came by to check something in the basement. Now, the basement was huge, dark, and cluttered with storage. Nobody really went down there unless they had to. As soon as the landlord stepped in, he heard a noise, something shifting in the shadows. Grabbing a baseball bat, because clearly he had the right instincts, he moved toward the sound and found that guy, the so-called nice one who had been staying with my neighbor. The second he was caught, the guy shoved the landlord to the ground and bolted out of the house, running full speed down the street. We called the cops, and believe it or not, they found him hiding inside a trash can a few blocks away. You can't make this stuff up. After the police searched the basement, they found that a small window had been propped open just enough for someone to slip in and out. In a dark corner, behind a bunch of boxes, they found his little nest, a pile of blankets, drug paraphernalia, and all my missing stuff. It looked straight out of a horror movie, like Creature's little hideout under the stairs in Harry Potter. But the absolute worst part? His flip phone was lying there, and when we went through it, we found dozens of photos of me, sleeping. That man had been living in my basement for months, sneaking into my apartment while I was out, or worse, while I was asleep. I don't even want to think about what could have happened if I had woken up at the wrong time, or if he had decided to do something worse than just steal from me. And the cherry on top? The charges against him got dropped. Nobody even contacted me about it. We weren't given a say as the victims, and this definitely wasn't his first run-in with the law. Apparently, my state likes to go easy on non-violent criminals, even when their crimes are terrifying and invasive. There's also a lot of behind-the-scenes deal-making between the police and small-time offenders who give up information on bigger drug dealers. So in the end, this guy got away with it. Thankfully, I didn't walk away with lasting trauma, just a lingering WTF feeling whenever I think about it. To this day, it still doesn't feel real, like some fever dream that couldn't have actually happened. But trust me, it did. A couple of years ago, I was working this job where I measured people's houses for flooring projects. Basically, I'd show up with an iPad, sketch out floor plans, and take measurements. It wasn't the most exciting gig, but I was good at it, so they loaded me up with 10 houses a day, driving all over the place. One day, after a long shift, I headed to my last appointment, which was way out in the middle of nowhere. I was already annoyed because the guy was late, but eventually, he pulled up next to my car, middle-aged, balding, dressed like an office worker with a tie and everything. He seemed a little awkward, but polite enough, apologizing for being late and letting me inside. As soon as I stepped in, I noticed how immaculate his house was. Minimal furniture, everything perfectly in place, and a strong smell of cleaning products. Not exactly cozy, but nothing that set off alarms right away. The first red flag came when he led me to the bedroom to take measurements. As I worked, he casually said, "Wow, my cats really like you. They don't usually take to strangers." But his cats hadn't moved an inch. They were just lounging across the room, completely indifferent to my presence. Weird, but whatever. Then, he suddenly asked, "So, does that thing keep track of where you are?" I didn't even hesitate. I forced a smile and said, "Yep, my boss knows exactly where I am at all times. Pretty cool, huh?" Total lie, but I wasn't about to tell this dude I was basically untraceable. He nodded, seemingly satisfied with that answer, and then hit me with the next curveball. "Be careful not to touch the gun on the nightstand. It might go off." I froze for a second, but I knew I had to act like nothing was off. Sure enough, I glanced over, and there it was, a handgun just sitting there. My gut was screaming at me, but I kept my cool, made some small talk, and continued working. Then he led me to the second bedroom, and again, he made the same comment about a gun on the nightstand. This wasn't just a coincidence. He wanted me to know they were there. My stomach was in knots at this point, and I just wanted to get the hell out of there. After I finished the 2 rooms on the work order, I met him in the kitchen, quickly trying to wrap things up. But then he interrupted me with, "Oh, can you measure the basement stairs? I forgot to add them, and I might want to carpet them later." Instant dread. I knew I shouldn't do it. Everything in me was saying no, but my customer service brain couldn't figure out a way to decline without making things weird. So, against my better judgment, I followed him to the basement door. The second I saw those stairs, I knew there was no way he was planning to get them carpeted. They were just old wooden planks leading down to a dimly lit, unfinished basement. But the real kicker? When I got down there, I saw 7 deep freezers lining the walls. In the middle of the room was a single hanging light bulb, an old recliner facing a dusty TV, and shelves full of VHS tapes. The entire scene looked straight out of a true crime documentary. I knew I had 2 options. Either he was going to let me leave, or I was never making it back up those stairs. I forced a smile, acting like I noticed nothing, and started heading up. My heart was pounding. When I reached the 5th step from the top, I felt it. He hesitated. So I hesitated. I could feel the tension in the air. My mind was screaming, "This is it. This is where it happens. Then, after what felt like an eternity, he stepped aside. I didn't waste a second. I power walked straight for the front door, but just as I reached for the handle, he stopped me again. "Oh, before you go, won't you give my cats a treat? They loved you so much." I turned around, and he was holding a bag of cat treats. The sheer normalcy of the moment threw me off. I quickly tossed some treats to the cats, muttered a thank you, and practically ran to my car. The second I got out of that driveway, I broke down into a full-blown panic attack. I couldn't even call my boss because I was in a dead zone. And here's the part that haunts me the most. If something had happened to me, nobody would have noticed until the next day when I didn't check in for my shift. Yes, they would have eventually traced me to that house, but by then, it would have been way too late. For weeks after, I couldn't sleep. I was terrified to go to work but had no choice. And the absolute worst part? In all the chaos, I forgot to write down his address. To this day, I have no idea who he was or what was really in those freezers. Let me tell you about one of the creepiest things that ever happened to me. This was years ago when I was living with my parents, who had a house next to this small red house that always felt off. Our backyard faced the side of the house, which had a deck and 2 big windows, but I never once saw anyone come or go. There were always at least 3 cars parked out front, so clearly someone lived there, but the place always felt weirdly abandoned. The only time I ever saw any sign of life was when I was about 12. I caught a glimpse of moving shadows against the far wall through one of the windows. That was it. A few years later, my sister moved out, and I took over her old bedroom in the basement. It was a cool setup. Big open space, a couch, and best of all, a private door leading directly outside to the backyard. The door had a small window, which my sister had covered with a Pulp Fiction poster. But when I moved in, I swapped it out for one of those sheer half curtains. The way my furniture was arranged, if I was in bed or chilling on the couch, I was facing the door. At first, everything was fine, but pretty soon, I started hearing something weird at night. The sound of leaves crunching in the outdoor stairwell leading to my door. I brushed it off, assuming it was just my cat wandering around, and didn't think much of it. That was, until one night when my parents were out of town, and my boyfriend and I were hanging out, smoking on the couch. All of a sudden, he stiffened up, just staring at the window. His face went pale, and when I asked him what was wrong, he said, "I just saw a camera flash." I laughed it off, blaming it on him being high. Who the hell would want pictures of 2 people getting stoned? But even though I tried to play it cool, something about it gnawed at me. I kept glancing at the little gap in the curtains, feeling this deep, uneasy paranoia creeping in. The stairwell outside my door didn't have a light, so if someone really was out there, I wouldn't be able to see them unless they moved right up against the window. By the time we went to bed, I still couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. And then, at around 3 in the morning, I heard it again. The unmistakable sound of heavy boots crunching leaves. That was not my cat. My heart was pounding, but for some dumb reason, maybe adrenaline, maybe just blind stupidity, I decided I needed to confront whoever was out there. I didn't even put on shoes. I just threw the door open. No one in the stairwell. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I spotted something. A man. He was standing in the middle of my backyard, facing me. He looked like he was in his mid-40s, tall, maybe 6 feet, wearing one of those dark mechanic jumpsuits. And in his hands, a clunky, outdated digital camera. We locked eyes. Neither of us moved. He looked just as shocked to see me as I was to see him. For a split second, it felt like time just stopped. My brain was screaming at me to do something, but I was frozen. And then, finally, I snapped out of it. "What the fuck are you doing?" My voice came out sharper than I expected, and the second I spoke, it was like I startled him awake. He immediately turned and ran, sprinted right through my backyard toward the red house, disappearing into the dark. And that was it. After that night, I never saw strange flashes of light again, never heard those eerie footsteps in the leaves. But what freaks me out the most is thinking about how many other nights he had been there, standing in the dark, watching me. Alright, so when I was 13, my best friend Lisa lived way out in the middle of nowhere. One of those places where there's not much to do except explore the woods and scare yourself for fun. One of our favorite spots was this super old abandoned house about a 15-minute walk from her place, or much faster if we took her golf cart, which we always did. The house had been empty forever, like even Lisa's mom remembered it being abandoned when she was younger. Apparently, an old man had lived there before passing away from natural causes. Nothing creepy, but the house itself. Straight up horror movie material. Broken windows, holes in the floors, and an absolutely disgusting, smelly basement. We loved it. It was the perfect spot to tell ghost stories, explore, and freak ourselves out. So one day, right around Halloween, we decide to go check it out again. We drive the golf cart down the long, overgrown driveway, parking off to the side so we wouldn't be too obvious in case someone drove by. We were messing around, grabbing our usual exploring gear, which, let's be real, was just backpacks and a crappy camera we barely knew how to use, when Lisa suddenly stopped talking. I looked up to see what had caught her attention, and standing right there, in the doorway of the house, was a guy. He looked a little older than us, maybe 18 or so, just standing there smiling at us. Now, we'd seen other people around the house before, other teens checking it out, probably doing the same stupid stuff we were. But something about this guy felt off. Then he spoke. "There's a party in the basement. It's $5 to get in." I swear my whole body screamed, "What the actual fuck?" There were no cars around, no music, no sounds of people talking, laughing, nothing that even remotely suggested a party was happening. Plus, I had been in that basement before, and there was no way anyone would willingly party down there. It was pitch black, smelled like mold and piss, and was full of broken junk. Lisa, trying to play it cool, just said, "That's okay, we were just leaving." But then he grinned wider and went, "I'm just kidding, it's free to get in. How old are you guys?" And for some reason that I still don't understand to this day, Lisa actually got out of the golf cart and started walking toward him. I, on the other hand, was not about to move a single damn muscle. She wasn't getting too close, more like trying to peek inside while keeping a little distance. But this guy was leaning in the doorway, just standing there like he was blocking her way. Meanwhile, I was still in the cart, trying everything to get her attention without making a scene. "Lisa, hey, let's go, I'm starving." "Lisa, my mom wants me home soon." "Lisa, come on, I'm getting a headache." Nothing. She was completely ignoring me. And that's when I saw it. In the window right in front of me, another person. They weren't trying to hide. They weren't lurking in the shadows. They were standing there, staring straight at me. And the creepiest part? They had their finger pressed against their lips, like they were telling me to be quiet. Then, suddenly, they started moving. Not walking, not waving, dancing. Or at least, I think it was dancing. They were swaying, shifting side to side in this weird, jerky way, chomping their teeth together like some kind of demented puppet. It was the most unsettling thing I have ever seen. At that moment, my brain was in full-on panic mode. I didn't care if I looked like a crazy person. I had to get us out of there. "Lisa, I have to pee, right now. We need to go, or I'm leaving you." Something in my voice must have snapped her out of whatever weird spell she was under, because she finally backed away, muttered something about coming back later, and got back into the cart. And the guy? He just smiled and waved like we were old friends. The person in the window? They stopped dancing the instant Lisa turned away and just stared at the guy in the doorway. We got out of there so fast, and as soon as we were back home, I broke down crying while trying to explain what I had seen. Lisa hadn't noticed the person in the window, but after seeing how freaked out I was, she promised me she wouldn't go back. To this day, I have no idea what was actually going on in that house. Maybe they were just some weird guys messing with us. Maybe they were high out of their minds and thought they were being funny. But one thing is for sure, you do not try to lure 13-year-old girls into an abandoned house.